Join Destination Discovery as we look into the grisly murder of Alice Wiltshaw. Alice Wiltshaw's brutal death in the quiet village of Barlaston in Stoke-on-Trent, England. It was described as the murder of the century. It was one of the grisliest crimes of that time, the brutal murder of Alice at her own home in Barlaston. Here we look back at the awful day in 1952 and how a meticulous investigation by the police saw her killer swing from the gallows. The body of 62-year-old Alice Wiltshaw was discovered by her husband, Cuthbert, when he returned to their home, Estoril House in Barlaston, Stoke-on-Trent, on Wednesday, July 16, 1952. Cuthbert, a wealthy pottery manufacturer, had finished work for the day and returned to the 14-room mansion in the early evening. To his horror, he found Alice lying in a pool of blood in the kitchen. The trail of blood and other evidence led police to the conclusion that Alice had initially been attacked in the kitchen, probably while she had been preparing the evening meal. The intruder had selected 2 heavy logs from the scullery and savagely beaten Alice about the head, knocking her unconscious. The assailant then went upstairs to steal property and rifle Alice's handbag. Upon returning downstairs, he discovered that Alice had regained consciousness and was now standing in the hallway. The attack began again as Alice tried to escape back towards the kitchen, but her assailant followed, striking her as he went. All kinds of weapons were used: vases, ornaments, and finally a 3-foot-long barbed poker, all found heavily bloodstained. Alice had made her way back to the kitchen. As she lay on the floor, dying, the killer delivered a final blow to the head with the poker. He also stabbed her in the stomach multiple times. There were, however, clues for the police to examine. The killer left behind a footprint and a pair of blood-stained gloves. The motive was clear: over £3,000 worth of jewellery was missing. Staffordshire police soon called in assistance from Scotland Yard, and Detective Superintendent Reg Spooner was sent to take charge of the case. He quickly determined that there was no sign of a break-in, and the crime had occurred when the servants were off duty. This suggested the killer was someone Alice Wiltshaw knew, someone familiar with the household routine. That, in turn, pointed to an ex-employee as a likely suspect. One by one, all ex-employees were contacted and eliminated from the inquiry, until only one name remained. Police could not trace a former worker, Leslie Green. Green, 29, was an ex-Borstal boy who had been employed as a chauffeur and gardener for the Wiltshaws. He had used his employer's car without permission and had been dismissed for disobedience just weeks before the murder. Witnesses placed a man fitting Green's description eating in the bar of the Station Hotel in Stafford on the day of the murder. He left at 3:30 p.m, only to return 3 hours later, matching the estimated time frame of Alice Wiltshaw's murder. Other witnesses placed a man resembling Green near the house around the time Alice was killed. A few days later, Green was traced, and when his girlfriend was interviewed, she showed officers rings he had recently given her, rings stolen from Alice Wiltshaw's fingers. The final piece of evidence came from a rip in the thumb of the left-hand glove found at the scene. The rip matched a healed cut on Green's thumb, indicating he had worn the gloves when he injured himself. His shoes also matched the footprint at the crime scene. Green's trial for murder began at Stafford on December 3, 1952, before Mr. Justice Stable. The proceedings lasted until December 5th. Green was represented by Mr. G.G. Baker and Mr. G.T. Meredith, while Mr. E. Ryder Richardson and Mr. J.F. Bourke led the prosecution. Green claimed an alibi. He had taken a train to Leeds to visit his girlfriend on the day of the murder. Surely he couldn't be in 2 places at once. But police scrutinised the railway timetable and proved that Green had enough time to commit the crime before travelling to Leeds. Yet, final proof was still needed. One of the items stolen from the house was an old RAF raincoat that Cuthbert Wiltshaw had used for gardening. Superintendent Spooner contacted railway police, asking whether any discarded coats had been found on the day of the murder. A blood-stained RAF raincoat had indeed been recovered from a train. The blood matched Alice Wiltshaw's. The train was the one Green had boarded when leaving Barlaston. Green was found guilty of murder. There was no appeal, and he was hanged by Albert Pierrepoint at Winson Green Prison in Birmingham on December 23, 1952. Former police inspector Alf Robbins, a detective sergeant at the time, recalled being first on the scene. Speaking in 1998, Robbins said, "There's no doubt about the most serious crime I investigated in my 30 years as a policeman. It was the vicious murder of Mrs. Alice Wiltshaw." Robbins recounted arriving within half an hour of Cuthbert Wiltshaw's discovery, alongside Superintendent William Crook. At the post-mortem, Home Office pathologist Professor J.M. Webster deemed it the most vicious murder of the century. Robbins detailed the various weapons used: logs, a saucepan, a porcelain vase, a brass bowl, a walking stick, and an old-fashioned poker with a hook on the end. He spotted wet shoe prints in the kitchen, distinctive with a horizontal pattern across the sole. Other vital clues soon emerged: blood-stained gloves found in the rose garden, a missing RAF raincoat later recovered on a train, and eyewitness reports of a man running towards the station. A week after the murder, Green turned himself in at Longton Police Station, casually stating, "I'm the man you're all shouting after. I am Leslie Green." Detective Reg Spooner noticed immediately. Green still possessed the unique shoes that matched prints at the crime scene. Though the case against Green was circumstantial, the evidence formed a clear mosaic. The cut in his glove matched an old wound, the blood-stained raincoat lined up with his wrist injury, and stolen jewellery was found in the possession of his girlfriend in Leeds. During the earlier court proceedings at Stone, he was seen to be scratching on the inside of the dock with a paperclip. We discovered afterwards that he'd scrawled the words, "Leslie Green made his last stand here." Actually, I found him an intelligent and likeable character. He wasn't scared about his situation and was more or less reconciled to taking the consequences for what he'd done. He accepted his fate. Yet, you wouldn't have thought Green was capable of committing such a terrible crime. I'm convinced that, if Leslie Green hadn't been full of drink that day, the tragedy at Barlaston would never have happened. As it was, Mrs. Wiltshaw died a terrible death, and Green was hanged at Winson Green Prison 2 days before Christmas. It was indeed a tragic story that will forever tarnish Stoke-on-Trent with its dark day in history.